most latest information, there are 3,473 confirmed positive cases of COVID-19 in Oklahoma. There are 7 additional deaths. 3 of them occurred in the last 24 hours. And there are a total then of 214 deaths in the state. Last week, Governor Stitt released his Open Up and Recover Safely plan, which details the first 2 phases of reopening. Phase 1 from May 1st through May 14th, and phase 2 from May 15th to May 31st. Beginning phase 2 is contingent upon our health outcomes in phase 1. And there will be more details in fact, we will place a link to the governor's plan in the chat box, and we will discuss more of that in detail later on the call. However, I want to emphasize that in both phase 1 and phase 2, social distancing is to be in place. Gatherings where social distancing is not possible should be avoided. Let's discuss the CARES Act funding. Last Thursday, the U.S. Department of Education released the application for the State Education Agency, or SEA, to apply for the elementary and secondary school relief funds, and we're referring to those as ESSER or ESSER. OSDE has been working on the application since that time and is prepared to submit it today. U.S. Department of Ed has committed to approving applications within 3 business days. OSDE will release the LEA application as soon as possible. Connectivity. This continues to be the priority for the State Department of Education when we think about what our kids need and how we would like to use those funds. We must use the time between now and the beginning of the next school year to connect as many students as possible to the internet at their home in order to prepare for any further possible resurgence of the virus. We have had very good conversations with the governor on this topic and believe that we share the same end goal of capitalizing on this time to finally close the digital divide in Oklahoma. We are optimistic that the governor will use the state's relief funds to make significant progress toward the end goal, specifically expanding broadband access. In addition, and as we have stated in our FAQs, schools should document funding and resources spent on COVID-19 and those activities and services, including connectivity, as funding sources may become available on a reimbursement model or funded based on documented costs. In particular, USDE has indicated that funds can be spent to reimburse expenses back to March 13th, 2020. Okay, I think on your mind right now, it seems, based on those who are texting me, are graduation ceremonies. So let's talk about that for a moment. When considering graduation ceremonies, districts must follow the orders given by the governor and guidance from the state health department and the CDC. Any sort of virtual ceremony, drive-in ceremony, mobile parade, where our social distancing is possible, it is then allowable and encouraged. Beginning May 1st, the state's Open Up and Recover Safely plan for phase 1 maintains the following restrictions. First, continue following safer at home guidelines for individuals over 65 or who are already part of a vulnerable population, people with autoimmune diseases, compromised systems, etc. 2, maximize social distance from others when in public. And that includes parks, outdoor recreation areas, and shopping areas. 3, avoid socializing in groups or facilities that do not readily allow for appropriate social distancing. 4, schools and organized sporting events and camps that are currently closed should remain closed until further notice, which could include phase 2. Which is the current goal for that would be May 15th, the start of phase 2. This information and directive is consistent with the state board's order for in-person instruction and extracurriculars to be closed through the end of the academic school year, which, as you know, is May 8th or after, depending on the school district decision on that date, but no sooner than May 8th. We will continue to monitor and review guidelines and provide updates as additional information is available. Now let's talk about phase 2. Beginning May 15th, contingent on certain conditions being met, please be mindful that the following guidelines are still in place. 1, continue following safer at home guidance for individuals over 65 or who are part of a vulnerable population. 2, maintain social distancing from others when in public. 3, avoid socializing in groups that do not readily allow for appropriate social distancing. While some businesses are allowed to reopen May 1st, social distancing must be maintained. As you plan in-person graduation ceremonies, please keep in mind that the CDC definition of social distancing is as follows. Stay at least 6 feet or 2 arms lengths from other people. Do not gather in groups. Stay out of crowded places and avoid mass gatherings. Finally, again, if all goes well and all goes as is currently projected, then on June 1, social distance requirements may be lifted. And again, may is the operative word. If you are considering an in-person graduation ceremony of some sort, I would encourage you to consider waiting until June 1st and following, and have contingency plans in place. And we will place, again, the link to the governor's plan in the chat. And we did discuss this with the governor yesterday. But we are happy to answer those questions that you have and try to address as many things as we can today on this call. Finally, I just want to say that the focus of our agency and the focus, we hope and believe, of your district and communities, first is safety, but second is that we have to address the widening learning loss, the unfinished learning that did not come to a completed place because of distance learning and the challenges that are occurring. So as we turn our focus and attention to wrapping up the year, making very important strategic plans for the summer and for the beginning of the school year, we really are focusing on using dollars in a strategic way to help first understand the depth of the learning loss and then mitigate that through as much of a resource that the State Department can leverage. And we are still doing this work, trying to leverage those state dollars and potentially state rates that could also provide greater savings for districts as we try to address the learning needs of our students as we enter the summer and the fall. All right, with that, I know we have a few things already started in the chat, and I'm going to ask Carolyn if Carolyn has any questions that we're ready to pitch and try to answer.
Yes, hi Superintendent. We do have a couple of questions. I think some of these have just been addressed, but if something needs to be reiterated, please put those questions in the chat box. First of all, there seems to be some confusion about the board's order, the State Board of Education, and when that ends. Does that end on May 8th or does that end on June 30th? Some had thought that the board's order extended until June 30th for extracurricular activities. Could you clarify?
Yes, and I definitely think that there has been confusion around this, but it is important that we go back to the actual directive of the state board. To present that, I would ask Brad Clark if you would please share.
Yeah, happy to do so, Superintendent. The board's order, or the first amended order from March 25th, as you said a moment ago, continues through the end of the academic year, which the board set at May 8th, not June 30th or June 1st, but indeed May 8th. Unless a district makes a determination on their own, a local decision to continue their academic year beyond May 8th. But the earliest is May 8th, and that was really the recommendation that the board took action on.
However, that does not remove the other things we just spoke about that address social distancing, the requirements of executive orders still in place, and the other would be the CDC guidelines. And that is something that we will continue to keep in front of you, but social distancing is still critical for the continued stabilization that we're seeing with flattening the curve.
Okay, on that note, could you speak to when staff can come back to the building, particularly support staff?
Okay. Well, for those of you who have been serving meals, you already are familiar with what that looks like and how that can be done in a safe way. I would ask if I think to be the most clear, it would be best probably to answer that in writing in our FAQs. I want to open this to Phil or Brad or Carolyn if you want to point to that or just underscore. I don't want to misspeak right now.
Yeah, I would just urge, this is Carolyn, folks, to read the governor's plan. It's actually quite short, and we've put the link in the chat a couple of times now. But it does have specific guidance for employers that reemphasizes many of the things that we've already said, including keeping common areas closed, and keeping folks practices for social distancing in place. So I would encourage you to read that as you are considering bringing the support staff back. And then also remembering, just as we reemphasized, that if only essential personnel are to be in the building until May 8th. And then after May 8th, we can refer to the governor's plan.
All of those comments and dedicated paragraphs to having safe spaces as we tried to work to provide child nutrition services and the beginning of distance learning, that all still applies. Those are smart moves that help keep people from cross-contaminating throughout the building. So again, it is about minimizing exposure and reducing as much as possible the traffic or individuals coming in and out of the buildings. I would just ask for district superintendents to please think about doing what we know we must do, but doing that in a way that respects the fact that we don't have data to know right now what's going to happen once we just begin mingling and coming out of this time of isolation for the most part, and to be very cautious in how things are structured as we then finish distance learning and begin to move into the final weeks of the academic calendar or fiscal calendar year.
Superintendent, would you have any guidance to share for schools as they're looking at activities possibly in June and July, particularly summer school?
We know that summer school is a definite need, and we also know that there are some who are considering this in June, others July, others even at the start of a school year early, and kind of that early back academy type with the idea of bringing in remedial support at that time. Again, this will be part of some of the recommendations we'd like to make to think about different scenarios. But if things are going well, it may be that we have an opportunity in June to meet and deliver that support. Others are doing it all through distance learning and focusing primarily on credit recovery. And that is part of the conversation I've been hearing from some superintendents. But is there a specific question that you have about whether or not it's allowed to have summer school? Because if that's the question, that has not been addressed by the state board.
I think you've answered it sufficiently for what we know right now, Superintendent. Continuing on, questions about graduation. If you have a small graduating class, say less than 20, and you had maybe a restricted number of guests, do you think that that would be feasible after May 15th to do that sort of ceremony in an auditorium or a gym or some other indoor facility?
If it can be done where it is virtual in the month of May, that is the best. If you want to have something with fewer restrictions and something more similar to what families are accustomed to with tradition, that really needs to be saved until June. However, there is not a strict admonishment against this, other than the governor's executive order does limit the size of groups to 10 or less. And I would be very, very concerned about having an indoor gathering, even though if I do understand that we do have some school districts that are graduating fewer than 10. And they believe they have a way to accomplish this. We would be happy to talk with you individually, but I can just tell you that in conversation yesterday with the governor, we asked about graduation after May 15th, and he just expressed that he was uncomfortable with this idea of having that kind of in-person traditional ceremony and would prefer that schools wait until after June 1. But that's not part of an executive order. But the CDC guidance is what we're going to be following. I don't know that I'm being very clear. I feel like I'm trying to answer that for small, medium, and large scenarios. And in doing that, it may sound unclear.
And I think, Superintendent, we might try to add something on this to the FAQs to help. But the fact of the matter is things are just uncertain right now. Okay.
Yeah, the main thing is it is important not to misinterpret that phase 1 is an all clear and we go back to everything that we used to do ordinarily in the month of May with regard to graduation and that or anything else. I mean, we are still in a very much easing in and watching carefully the data to see what occurs.
Okay, Superintendent, could you address whether or not you or the state board are considering a common start date for the fall?
Yes, that is something that we have been discussing just more in conversation with the superintendent advisory group. There could be some advantages to this. I think that yesterday, as we were on a call with a group of superintendents, there was discussion and there was an interest among some, not everyone. We haven't polled everyone to know, but there was then the question that if we were to start early and have more of everyone in the same place, and I'm just going to suggest if we were to do something, pick a date, whatever that is, maybe August 1, let's say, just for conversation. Some would be concerned that there would be potentially extra cost associated with that if we were actually adding 2 additional weeks into the year. but I'm not sure that that's actually what will happen. We know next year is very likely that there will be absences. There are going to be the risk and potential for site level or community level stopping, and there is a likelihood for quarantine to occur in isolation in certain areas. And so I don't think that it is something that means if we were to have an early start that would be a recommendation, that would mean it's an extended school year necessarily, and that the cost would be different than what it would ordinarily be with the 1,080 hours and a district's choice on their calendar. But I do think that we would want to get with our students as soon as possible, knowing that we have a really large gap, and that gap is growing with every month our children are out of direct instruction with their teachers. So I would ask those of you on the call, what is your interest? And I think that's something I'm interested in learning. Are you interested in starting back a little earlier, or having a common start date? And happy to have you add comments or reasons for your thoughts in the chat, and we'll review that.
Okay, Superintendent, we have some other questions. Would you have any more information to share on the governor's emergency education relief funds, the $40 million? Is there any more information that you have that you could share?
Yes, we had, and we have been having conversations. We had a good meeting this week, and we do see that there's a very common priority around the need for having devices, connectivity, increase in broadband to our students in their homes, and as well as certainly in the campuses of our school districts. But that connectivity is something that I know is a priority. It has been underscored in these meetings. It's very much a priority for me. And we are looking to have more of a coordinated approach to how we leverage these dollars, so that we know if the governor ends up moving in one direction to address this, then our response at the state level will complement that. So there's just, we came away from the meeting feeling very positive about that common ground in the understanding and desire. I have to give a shout out to Warner Public Schools and what they've been able to do with, I believe it's 200 of their homes that were wired just very recently, and in coordination with, I think it's Cross, their provider, through the leadership of Dave Vinson. And there's even a little Elevate series that we did that you'll look for that and see, but that's an example of what we want to see happening in Oklahoma, regardless of where you live. The ability to have that connectivity remains our top priority. And I believe we were going to make some real meaningful advances to that end.
Great, okay. There was a question in the chat about driver's education, but no other details. We did release some information about driver education in our most recent set of FAQs, but if there's something that still needs to be addressed, please clarify your question in the chat if you don't mind. Superintendent, there was a question, I believe this may have came from Don Raleigh, question about a possible ACT administration in the fall that would strictly be a service to students but would not be included in accountability. Do you have any information that you can share on that?
That is something that we would like to be able to accomplish. We don't have word today if that will be accomplished, but you have that right. It would not be for accountability purposes. we want to make sure all of our juniors or those who were juniors last year still have that opportunity before they graduate. So we are working on those details. And unless there is news that I'm unaware of, I do see Craig Walker is on here. Craig, have I misspoken?
No, we are working with the ACT and College Board to provide some different options. So we should have some information shortly.
Thank you. All right, thank you for that.
Okay, there are a couple of questions regarding serving summer meals, and I think Jennifer is on the call, and I don't know if you've been monitoring the chat, but would you want to address some of the questions about the ability to serve summer meals?
Sure, Carolyn. I saw one about their staff are tired, and I've been hearing that a lot. We do want you to continue feeding as long as you can into the summer. I don't know if this would be an option for you. If you have multiple sites now, if maybe you could keep 1 or 2 open for 2 weeks and give some people a break at the other 1 or 2 sites, and then reopen the other 2 and give the people a break. I don't know if that's an option for you, but I have been hearing all over that, yes, the ladies are tired. The gentlemen, I always say ladies, but there's gentlemen in food service as well. They are. Definitely, there's probably a need in everyone's community right now to feed. And so we would want that first and foremost is making sure the children are fed and the programs are there to do it. I'm not sure if I may have missed another one. All the chat started coming in really quick and I was trying to get back to him. Was there another one I missed, Carolyn?
Well, I thought I saw a second one as well, but now I can't find it. So if you have a specific question about summer feeding, if you would put it back in the chat, I would appreciate that. And we'll try.
I mentioned on the advisory meeting yesterday that several of you have asked in prior meetings about our funds. Are our funds in jeopardy? Are we going to be able to pay these claims? Unbeknownst to Child Nutrition, my director of finance received a letter or an email from the finance department at USDA regional office, and we received a little over $64 million yesterday to pay these claims. So the money will be there. Don't let that be a concern at all. The claims can be paid. They could be paid before, and they can definitely be paid now. So those funds are available from March through September, and so we're good to go. I see something. We will continue providing. Oh, they're jumping. Meals through June 12th to help. Okay, that's awesome. And I mean, if you need to go past June 12th, then you can do it. We highly recommend it. We definitely want your community to be met. Can food delivery continue during summer under SSO? Yes, it can. Currently, that non-congregate and waiver and all of that is good through June 30th, unless Sunny Purdue at the federal level says the health emergency is over. We haven't heard that that's happening or anything, but it is done at the federal level. It's not done at the local level. But until then, all the waivers are still in place. The meal pattern waiver goes till May 31st. That was extended last week, I believe. And yes, you can do meal delivery for SSO. Should we continue?
Okay, Jennifer, yeah, I think the question that we had missed earlier was from Luann. You might see that in the chat. Should we continue to provide food for students even if other communities are stepping up to help?
If you're able to, I think you should. Yes, I think that would be amazing. Our districts. I think that might be the last one. Oh, can we serve grab and go style in June for SFSP? Yes, you still can do grab and go in June. The non-congregate feeding waiver is still in place through June 30th unless Sunny Purdue issues a mandate for it to stop sooner.
Okay, Superintendent, back to you, I think. Still getting several questions about requests that schools are getting for little leagues to use facilities beginning May 1, or other sorts of activities to be happening in schools May 1. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would assume that local school boards control who gets on those grounds or not. And you do have control over that. If it's not safe and you don't think they should be there, don't let them. This obviously is something that there are restrictions and protocol around that with small organizations, I assume, are a little bit different, but I would think that that there's, I don't understand how we can think it is appropriate to use facilities in a way that don't meet the governor's directive. But I am not sure, are you asking, do you want there to be a some kind of coordination with the State Department of Education and the Little League?
The request was for guidance on how to handle those requests, yes.
And they are wanting to practice and hold games starting May 1?
That is what the question states, yes. It says they're interpreting the sports venues opening on May 1st to include Little League, but I actually think that that is a misstatement. That may begin in phase 2, but in phase 1, let me see if I can find it again.
Carolyn, can I jump in here real quick?
Please.
So in phase 1, the language I think that is being looked at is recreational areas may be open. However, I would point to the more specific language in phase 1 that says schools and organized sporting events and camps that are currently closed, which we are at least through May 8th, should remain closed until further notice. And so I think if there is a move into phase 2, which has a current goal of May 15th, that might be something we can consider and discuss in more detail. But at this time, I would defer to the language that specifically says these things are to remain closed.
Okay, switching gears a little bit, we've had a question about guidance on student retention outside of 3rd grade. So particularly the possibility or guidance on retention for students in kindergarten, 1st or 2nd grade.
Well, I will just share with you that I don't think that's really appropriate. The entire state is in the same place, and to retain only certain students, ordinarily the retention of students is something that is not supported in research. The retention that is actually the better approach is to give strategic targeted intervention and support in the next year. And to continue, just like we do with RSA, we continue to give that support until that child has reached their grade level reading, until that has occurred, but they are not allowed to slip through the cracks. And that is again something that we would be very concerned about, like a whole grade level being retained, or a decision to start kids in the same grade they were in. The discussion around this at the national level is to know that there will be unfinished learning that's going to occur from this spring that will be folded in along with the next year's classes and standards. But to retain is to dismiss all of the other work that has been done throughout the beginning of the school year and prior to March the 13th. I do think, though, it underscores how significantly we need to have a plan for going back into school as early as possible in order to be able to address these gaps that are obviously more profound and pronounced than they would be ordinarily. And what may have been appropriate last year for summer school is really going to look different for this year. And we know that our kids that are also hungry and will have been disengaged are going to need that time. It's not going to be just and I think that obviously we're preaching to the choir here, you all know, but the time that our kids will need is going to take really years to rebound. The longer this gap is left unmet and disengaged. So we want to get them engaged, and we want to know exactly where they are with some form of diagnostic tool that you can give, that we're working on, that we would like to be able to provide for free for you as a tool of one of many of your tools, that will look a little bit more individually at students for your use or not.
And Superintendent, on that note, could you address what your expectations are for distance learning next school year? What do you think that will look like, and the need for distance learning next year?
I think it's going to look different for different communities. We don't have a crystal ball, none of us do. We know, though, that it's very unlikely that we will see another emergency declaration for the state, and a repeat of what happened earlier in March and April. However, this is why I think getting started early is so important, because there will be likely the need for some of our school sites or classrooms or campuses to have to address the loss of being able to be together if there is a COVID-19 resurgence or breakout or outbreak. And so I do think that distance learning is going to need to be just something very, very much a part of what we do ordinarily. But that what I'm envisioning is the ability to have those tools in place, used in the classroom, but that can be more fluid, and as a student or a set of students need to be out of the typical traditional way of being present together, that they are not losing ground, and that the work can continue. That's really what we're striving for. We know that it will be very unlikely that we're in that place that we all want to be at the start of the school year, but we're working very hard to ramp up for that, and we'll continue working until we have our districts in a place where they can offer that kind of blended model that will meet the needs of their students, whether they are advanced students, students that want to take advanced coursework, AP coursework, or those that are a part of alternative education or out because of COVID-19, or really addressing a very varied scenarios. So again, what we're planning is different scenarios to be able to address individual students and the individual course needs, so that they can have minimum disruption next year, so that we can get through this year. And then building into our calendar those fluctuation points. And that's why I think starting the year early is the most important way to have the greatest amount of flexibility as the year ends, or we will be going to school longer to make up that time.
Okay, there was a question about coding attendance, and should districts be coding attendance during this time? Brad, maybe is that something that you could address?
Yeah, happy to. I think this is actually set out in the FAQs. I'm not looking at them right now, but I'm confident that this is fully addressed in there, and there's a link in that to specifically how these codes should be entered into the student information systems. I think the easiest way to answer it is to say that there's not a requirement that this information on attendance be put into our state system, but it's valuable information for us to have. Locally, you may have different awards and things of that nature that are dependent in some part on attendance, and so it would likewise be important to have it there. But for attendance at the state level, there's nothing that conditions that one way or the other on funding. As you may recall, the board in March set the funding cutoff date on attendance for average daily attendance as May 12th, I believe. Give or take a day or two, please. But those were cut off as of, let's say, March 12th. So there was nothing on attendance that factors in at the state level. Locally, that is up to your local determination, but we do have this guidance and more specifics set out in the FAQs.
Okay.
About distance learning, I would hope that this does become part of how we serve students, and that we aren't thinking about a time where we go back to distance learning. Instead, this should be something that we're striving for in an effort to have more of the individualized learning pathways for students. And I think there's real opportunity there. You know, obviously, the greatest challenge we have is catching up, closing the gaps. And there are creative ways to incorporate that right now into your school calendars so that our students aren't just idling without that opportunity to really try to build, reinforce, and regain, reinforce skills, recover what's been lost, and then gain momentum. That's not going to happen with less time and opportunity. And so use that distance learning now as you think about what next year looks like to actually increase those opportunities. That would be my encouragement to you, especially at a time where we're going to have funds to be able to have more of these kinds of opportunities for free at a state level. I mean, that free opportunity won't last beyond a certain time frame, but we are willing to invest our state SEA funds to help make you have some of these kinds of opportunities for your students. And we do hope that you'll take advantage of that. And then I did see a question in there about what if a student was already recommended for an appropriate decision related to retention. Of course, those should be really few and far between. But of course, that's the decision that belongs with those who know that student best. And that is not a comment I'm making. I was answering a more broader question about retention because of COVID-19 and a state level response.
Okay, Superintendent, there were, has been a question or two regarding the state of the state budget and what districts can expect going into next fiscal year. Is there anything that, any update you could share on that?
Yeah, so we are, of course, very, very grateful that we will not be considering cuts right now through the end of June 30th. We don't know what that budget will be. We know that the legislature has asked the agencies all across the state to give scenarios of what cuts at different levels would mean. We've been very forceful in our language about how devastating any kind of sizable cut that is being, thrown around, what that means in real terms to students. And what those obligations are that the state already has, and how very critical it is for funding to be as close to flat as possible because of what districts have done with the teacher pay raise, and some even going above and beyond that $7,400 raise. And we know that the law is you can't go below what you're paying a teacher now if they're doing the same duties in the same district. And that is a important gain that we've made over the past number of years, and we don't want to lose momentum as we also have had this teacher shortage and perhaps are still in the throes of that with upcoming retirements, etc. But these are the kinds of conversations we are having and did express. And I would venture to say that it is difficult to imagine a scenario where there are absolutely zero losses to our education budget in the next year. If that were to happen, then it would mean a loss to all other agencies closer to 16%. And, or I may need to lean on Carolyn if I've misspoken on that.
Yeah, I've heard 16 to 18%, something in that range.
Yeah. So Carolyn, do you have any comment you want to make related to that, since you speak with those appropriation chairs so frequently?
No, I think that you have accurately stated it. I think that we will have some sort of cut, but I do know that our budget chairs in particular are working very hard to keep that as minimal as possible, and certainly not some of the higher numbers that have been tossed around in the 7.5% range. Really hoping and think that it's likely to be under 5%. But still a lot of things up in the air, and clearly there's no budget agreement yet. So we are all just kind of bracing for what the possibilities might be. One more question, and then we can adjourn unless there's any last thing that somebody wants to put in the chat here. There was a question about how distance learning days would count in the next school year. This would probably be a question for Brad, but as to whether or not a district who has students doing distance learning on various days of the week, how do those count when it comes to schools meeting the minimum requirements for days and hours?
Yeah, so those days count just as any other instructional day would count. In fact, we saw that with the move to distance learning from April 6th through the remainder of the school year. And so if that continues next fall, they will be counted as instructional days.
Thank you. And I think also Aaron Espolt had a comment. He wanted to just kind of underscore to help further clarify some of the thoughts and work that we're doing right now as we're planning and preparing on that recovery phase, including distance learning. Aaron, are you on?
Yes, thank you, Superintendent. Just real quick, I wanted to add to the comments that you've already made. Again, coming from the school leaders and superintendent spot that I was in, I just encourage all school leaders to be using this time and the new resources that we have coming to us and making available to us to plan to enhance our distance learning opportunities. We all know that what we've been doing over these last few weeks, we needed to spin up pretty quickly to meet the immediate needs of our students. But we do have this opportunity now and over the summer to make a more effective and comprehensive plan. And especially I've heard from a lot of superintendents who are hoping to do distance learning days and work those type of things into their calendar and be really innovative in some of their scheduling that they're doing. And I know superintendent encourages all of those as well. But as we look at doing that, we need to really be leveraging the resources that the state is providing, as well as our support organizations and frameworks that are in existence to be able to make comprehensive plans. And we're here to help and assist in any of that to allow for a seamless transition in and out of school. We foresee a future where our school districts, there will not be distance learning as we know it right now, but more of this is just how school operates. And we have the opportunity to do that. And now that we have all kind of experienced this time, how can we make that a more effective delivery model for delivering new instruction and meeting the needs of individual students and individualizing instruction? There's endless possibilities, but we have to use this time now. And the State Department is doing a lot of work to be able to better assist you in doing that, as well as provide resources for you to be able to do that more effectively. And those will be coming soon, I hope. And so with all that being said, please, I urge all school leaders to contact us or contact your support organizations to be able to identify a comprehensive plan, whether or not we believe COVID or any other pandemic will ever occur again. We need to have those plans in place for meeting the needs of individual students who may just learn in a different format or medium than what we do. So Superintendent, thanks for the opportunity, but I encourage and really urge all district leaders to use this time to not say, oh, we've done distance learning and we know what that looks like, but to enhance your plans get ready for the next thing that may come about, but ultimately just find a better way to have traditional schooling than what we've ever been able to do in the past.
Very good. And actually, we will have a survey coming to you this week that we would like you to watch for and then complete. It's going to be very brief, but we are going to be surveying you on some of what you have, what you're using, if you're pleased with it or not. And this will help guide us as we are reviewing various options right now and looking to make decisions about how we will invest state level resources that will be coming through those CARE Act funds for the state agency to be able to benefit in distance learning. Okay, so please look for that. And we're trying to make that so that it can be answered very rapidly and turned back around. So again, thank you. Are there any other questions before we wrap up and let everybody go?
I think we have answered everything either in the chat or verbally. I'm watching to see if one last thing pops in the chat box, but otherwise I think we're good to go.
All right. Well, thanks guys. I appreciate it. Thanks for your messages coming. I know you're under a lot of pressure to get it right, make decisions to make as many people safe, but also feel honored when it comes to graduation. And I just appreciate all the extra work you're doing as well to keep kids fed. This is how we keep them physically safe. They need those nutritional supports to not only stay healthy, but to be ready to learn as we resume back. And please look then for additional tools that we're going to have, additional FAQs, and some of the work that we are beginning and will be providing regarding recovery plans and the support for kids as we move forward and hopefully move into what I believe will be a strong next school year. It's going to be different, but it can be a strong academic year. We just have to stay nimble and be strategic in how we invest. We will get through it. This is not a time that I think will mean devastation. This is going to be a time of knitting together in a stronger way than we've had in recent memory, and our kids will be better for it. We just can't in any way drop any balls. So thank you guys for keeping those questions coming. You help us anticipate where we need to provide additional answers or work to have further discussion with you. I appreciate your partnership. Be safe, be well, take care.